while back I made a video entitled "The British Police Force, Public Enemy Number One." In it, it's fair to say I wasn't very nice about our boys in blue. In fact, you could say I was downright insulting. And I've been planning on a follow-up for some time. And it may be that in the week that a policeman was shot dead in Croydon, whilst the force knows what it's like to experience loss, it might be the time to offer an olive branch to you so-called citizens in uniform. So let's get the obviousness out of the way. The murder of anyone, let alone a police officer, is of course a tragedy, no matter what the circumstances. That policeman may have been a father, a brother, a cousin, a nephew, an uncle, a brother-in-law, a stepfather, a stepson, or a husband. He was certainly the son of someone and a friend and a colleague to others. A murderer has many victims, far beyond the one slain. And it's at times like this that the police will understandably feel that the public should share in their grief and revere the memory of their fallen comrade. He died protecting the public, they will say. He is dead because he was prepared to put himself on the line. He died, they'll say, for us. And perhaps that's true. I know nothing about him, being only the day after his murder. Perhaps that is true. Perhaps this as yet unknown policeman did display the finest attributes of his profession. Maybe he did pursue his career with a dedication and entered a dangerous situation without fear or favour, as per the Peelian principles, which are supposed to be the code of behaviour for the police force. Maybe he did, but if he did, he was certainly pretty unusual. Because where was that impulse of supreme self-sacrifice in enforcing the law when the Marxist mob of Black Lives Matter were tearing through central London? Where was the evidence of the force, or the service as they've taken to calling themselves lately, operating under that principle of doing their job without fear or favour? The very fact of an officer having been cut down in a possibly routine operation, or even in a planned raid, but without the warping presence of the world's media, certainly suggests that, at the very least, he wasn't doing his job to look good. And that's not something that can be said about his employer, the MPS, or the Metropolitan Police Service, when they decided to grovel in front of the BLM mob. But the thing about the police in that situation was that despite it being quite obvious that they were just posing by taking the knee, and in doing so pathetically attempting to signal their understanding of the plight of the difficulty of being a black person in a Western liberal democracy, they also unwittingly displayed not only their weakness but also their lack of commitment to actually performing their primary purpose. For the avoidance of doubt, my boys and girls in blue, that is enforcing the law, and without fear or favour. Because what does without fear or favour actually mean? It means, firstly, you enforce the law without being afraid of the repercussions, whether it be violence or just by being called racist. And secondly, it means that you do not enforce the law selectively. You don't favour one side over the other. It means you don't take sides. It means, for instance, that if there is an illegal gathering, the same rules apply, whether it be a climate change protest, Black Lives Matter, or an anti-lockdown protest. You don't take the knee for BLM and then lead a baton charge against peacefully protesting anti-lockdown protesters. But what's also strange about the Met taking the knee was that they obviously thought it would make them look good in the public eye. In that instance, they did their job with fear and with favour. In one instance, they managed to look both corrupt and cowardly, which is quite an achievement. because there's not many organisations or people that can manage both of those vices at the same time. Now, because of said tragic death of one of their officers, the police may be expecting some outpouring of sympathy for them as they continue to enforce the lockdown. They may be thinking that the death of an officer in the line of duty is just what they need to soften their image as they morph finally into the Stasi that technology and Boris Johnson's government has enabled them to become. They may be thinking that, in an act of solidarity with them and an understanding that they have a difficult job to do, that all those malcontents and conspiracy theorists will finally drop their opposition and acquiesce to adopting the face masks without further complaint. Well, I for one will not. But what I will do instead is attempt to encourage them to perhaps remember why they joined the police in the first place. Of course, a job that includes exercising power over others will always attract a certain type, and that type is not my audience. My focus is instead those coppers who can be reached, the ones that actually want to do something good for others, for the public, for those that, in essence, are their paymasters. Some people will, with considerable justification I might add, believe that my appeal will fall on deaf ears. Coppers are all the same. They're all in it for themselves, for their gold-plated pensions, the kind that people in the private sector can only dream about. And this is probably true. It's probably true for most coppers. But there will be some now that are at the very least uncomfortable about what they are being told, not asked, told to do, to police words rather than actual acts of violence, to kneel down in the face of a screaming, howling mob on one day and then charge a peaceful protest the next. There may be some, how many I don't know, but some who recognise that the reason there was a baton charge against peaceful protesters when there wasn't one against BLM was because the lockdown protesters were actively challenging the law and the police with it. Because the BLM riots, for all their sound and fury, were essentially about platitudes. Be nice to black people. Poor black people. We don't like people who are not nice to black people. And that's an easy thing to accommodate, since there is no actual challenge to law, hence the grovelling. But the very existence of protesters in defiance of a law that says there must be no protests or gatherings cannot be tolerated. There will be some coppers who recognise this for the spitefulness that it is. And we need to get to those coppers. Because if we can get to them and get them to find some fucking backbone, their moral courage will elevate them immediately above their orders following colleagues. They will become leaders. But don't get me wrong here. I don't wish to be misunderstood. I do hate you. I hate all of you. And I stand by every word in that previous video. Even those coppers with whom I got entangled with last Saturday, who were personable and who treated me professionally and respectfully. I hated them also, although I tried not to show it. But you've got a lot of ground to make up to get me even to consider respecting you. Because I don't hate you because you acted like bully boys when faced, as usual, with a soft target. It's pathetic, but I don't hate you for that. I don't hate you because you choose to employ hundreds of officers dedicated to trawling through social media in search of hate speech, while young black boys are being stabbed to death in record numbers on the streets of London. So much for Black Lives Mattering. No, I hate you for one thing in particular that encompasses another in general. I hate you for allowing the industrial scale mass gang rape of children across scores of towns all over England. That's what I specifically hate you for. That's the specifics. I hate you because there were countless opportunities for you to stop what is certainly the worst crime imaginable against the most vulnerable people in society, our children. In the lockdown, this has slipped, or more accurately, been removed from the public's consciousness, but there it remains. In a twisted, perverse and kind of fucked up way, one of the more heartening chants that is routinely directed at the police is, "Pedo protectors." No matter what the protest, that chant is never far from the surface. People are not forgetting, and as long as there is breath in my body, they won't forget. And it's ironic that in your desire not to be called the nasty word racist, you are instead called the nasty words paedophile protectors. So was it worth it? All that effort, all that strenuous effort to look the other way, to label 12-year-old girls as prostitutes, to arrest their concerned fathers for breaching the peace, to twist and bend the law to allow multiple gang rapists to go free time after time after time, to rape and sodomise defenceless children again and again and again and again and again. All that effort just to not be called racist. Was it worth it? It might have been easier, in retrospect, to actually enforce the law. But that's just a thought. And I hate you generally for a particular character trait. Cowardice in the extreme. As I've said before, I don't consider myself a particularly brave individual. And like most men, I wonder how I might have acquitted myself when commanded to go over the top or charging out of a landing craft on the Normandy beaches. The truth is, I don't know how brave I might be. None of us do, until we're tested. But perhaps due to my personal history, I believe that courage is the highest of human virtues, and its opposite, cowardice, to be the very worst. But let me be clear here. The soldier who refuses to go over the top when commanded, or freezes when the landing craft ramp comes down, may be considered a coward when compared with his comrades who managed to do their duty. But can any of us really be sure that we wouldn't fail at that moment? That man I do not judge, although it's possible I may revere his comrades more. No, what I despise is the collective and sustained cowardice of our police forces to do the right thing. As I say, there were countless as in too many to count, countless opportunities to stop this horror. And for decades it went on. And the longer it wasn't addressed, the more children were being raped. And you knew this, and whilst you were rationalising this and making excuses, more children were being raped. Some estimates put the figure of abused children, girls overwhelmingly, it must be said, at 500,000. 500,000. So consider the police in Rotherham, as well as local councillors, local politicians and social workers who also conspired in this filth, where 1,400 girls were abused over a 16-year period. That's 16 years of the police knowing that this was happening. 16 years of this not affecting their consciences, or at least 16 years of them learning to live with their consciences about it. 16 years of them wondering if they should let this carry on or not. 16 years of them having opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to make it right and to do the right thing. 16 years of them watching their own daughters grow and seemingly not caring that, but for the grace of God, it could be their girls on the bloody meat rack. 16 years of them deciding whether or not they had the courage to put their heads above the parapet and risk their fucking pension, or instead let hundreds more children be raped. And they made their decision. They chose to keep their pensions. Because to risk one's job and pension, that's only normal courage. A close friend of mine, a lawyer, once lost his job on a point of principle. Everybody is entitled to a defence, and a lawyer cannot choose not to defend someone, even if he is, for instance, a paedophile. But if the client, the accused, admits to his lawyer that he is guilty, the lawyer cannot then represent him if he pleads not guilty, even if nobody else knows. There are, of course, plenty of lawyers who will break this principle, but my friend didn't. A pretext was found and he was let go. He told his boss, and his boss said, "Pretend you didn't hear him," but he wouldn't. A pretext was found and he was let go. Now his career was affected by that decision, quite by how much he doesn't know, but the cost to him was fairly immediate and pretty obvious. He could have done the easy thing. He chose not to. And I admire him enormously because of that. So it's not as if I'm expecting the police to be especially courageous. I'm sure all of us have done things in the moment that we wish we hadn't. We wish that we'd stood up to that bully, and we didn't, and the moment passed. Hopefully, the shame of that, even if only internally, will fortify us to do better next time. If it took us 16 years of not doing the right thing, and still we failed to find some backbone, then perhaps there's a job waiting for us in the South Yorkshire Police Service. And don't be telling me that the Met hasn't allowed such things on its patch. If it can, and did happen, in Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, Newcastle, Oxford, Canterbury, Huddersfield, Manchester, Barrow-in-Furness, and God knows where else, the assumption must be that it could happen anywhere, and with the connivance even of New Scotland Yard. If the police had even a normal level of everyday individual and collective courage, the grooming gangs would have been a few tiny isolated cases. The fact that it was tolerated, and I cannot even believe that such a thing could ever be tolerated in any circumstances, allowed it to spread as the perpetrators became wise to the fact that they would not only not be arrested, but they would not even be stopped. And that was the real evil here. And to add to that evil, all the police forces involved still allowed us to believe that they were actually policing things. And we, the trusting great British public, gave them a certain amount of slack when they were found wanting in some way or other. They're doing a difficult job, we said. We know they're not perfect, we said, but at least they're trying. At least they're doing something. And they allowed us to believe that they were doing the best they could. Hard-working, underfunded and underappreciated, honest coppers. Honest? Honest? What could be more dishonest than lapping up the public's appreciation whilst at the same time shielding thousands of child gang rapists from prosecution? So my appeal to you potentially good coppers, and I say potentially because we cannot, without evidence, assume that you do exist. Show yourselves. Stand up and be counted. Stand up en masse. Stand up and say, we will not be a Stasi. We will not impose these draconian measures that are more fitting to a dictatorship, and stop using us as political muscle. Even if only one of you refuses to enforce these laws, that will be such a statement that many, many more will follow. I mean, it can't be that difficult to refuse to enforce the wearing of a mask in public. It can't be that difficult. After all, thousands and thousands of you didn't prevent the mass gang rape of children, which, last time I checked, also happens to be illegal. And for all that I disagree with when it comes to Black Lives Matter, if there's one thing I have some sympathy with, it's defund the police. Because there is absolutely nothing to suggest that any of those thousands and thousands of girls would have been any worse off if the police had never existed in all those disparate towns and cities. And conversely, there is everything to suggest that they would have been immeasurably better off if their own communities had been allowed to protect them, rather than risking the police arrest them as vigilantes. You, the police, actively shielded child rapists and then went after those who tried to stop it, and even those who tried to report on it. I mean, what the fuck are we paying you for? Where once the police force was something to be respected, supported by the majority of the population and upon whose consent you relied, you face a future where you will be increasingly resented, hated, and above all shunned by those whom you move amongst. Because we will remember what kind of men you are, what you allowed, what you were too cowardly to stop. We will remember those children you sacrificed because you were too chicken shit to speak out, when we continue to face you on the barricades. And it will fortify us. So will that be worth it? Paedophile protectors.